Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is a special episode where we'll be discussing air battles of history and probably have a sneak peek into the air battles of the future. I have with me Air Marshal Anil Chopra, PVSM, AVSM, VM, VSM, a fighter pilot, a test pilot, and may I now add, an author. I will tell you what in a little bit. He's a pioneer of the Mirage 2000 squadron who commanded a Mirage 2000 squadron as well. He was the team leader of India's MiG-21 Bison upgrade project in Russia. He's commanded operational air bases both in the western and the eastern sectors of this country and was the head of the Indian Airforce in Jammu and Kashmir. He was also the head of operational inspection team of the Indian Air Force. After an illustrious career in the Indian Air Force and becoming an air marshal, he retired. Today, he's the Director General of the Center of Air Power Studies. I think he finds some time to write and speak about various subjects. Today, we are here to discuss his latest book, and I'm sure one of many more coming in, The Greatest Air Aces of All Times. Sir, thank you so much, sir, for joining me today to discuss this, wonderful thing, as a matter of fact, to bring about a certain amount of flame in potential future aviators.
Yeah, thanks, Adi, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure, being with you. And I must tell you, I'm a big fan of yours because, the way you have been doing these presentations, the kind of following that you have got, and the kind of viewership that you have got, it's a pleasure. And I go to the YouTube and watch each one of the interviews that you do with such important people on such important subjects. And I'm sort of very happy to be with you a second time. Yes.
Humbled, sir. I'm humbled because of those words. So before I begin questioning about the book and about the subject, I'd like to ask you, sir, how did you actually think about writing this book and how did you go about it?
Yeah, Ali, when I was very small, I got enamored by aviation, having been brought in Punjab in a small town called Kapurthala, and nearby was a big base, Adhampur, from where, especially during 65 and 71 war, we saw a lot of action taking place. And I was in a Sainik school, so there was a military band of mine, and finally thereafter I joined the Air Force. So from a very young age, the aviation was there, and of course, joining the Air Force, becoming a fighter pilot, aviation became part of your blood. But how I got the idea of writing this book is that I have a grandson who is now around 7.5 years old. Knowing that his Nana is a aviator, a fighter pilot, he was very fond of aviation, and he's got a huge collection of World War II and aircraft-related books, and of course, his favorite is Spitfire. And seeing those books, it occurred to me that, oh my God, as a young aviator, I had read about some of these air races. Why not I write a book, compile and choose some large number of these air races to make this book called The Greatest Air Races of All Time. And the book has got stories of 25 air races. It's a pictorial book with large number of pictures, the history, story, authentic stories of authenticated kills that these people achieved in the air.
Interesting, sir. And those were the days when people used to rack up. And I'm sure when we go through this video, people will realize what racking up kills really means. So for the first question, the concept of an air race, I mean, where did it come from? And who would be the first air race that you would like to talk about, sir?
Adi, the concept of air ace is as old as air battles. The flying ace or air ace is a military aviation aviator who's credited with shooting down 5 or more enemy aircraft during aerial combat. The concept emerged in 1915 during the World War I time, and it was more or less as old as dogfighting itself. It was a term intended to provide the home population with a cult hero in what was otherwise a war of attrition. The combat duels of aces were widely reported, and an image was created of a chivalrous knight, and that's the way they behaved also in real life. For a brief early period in the initial years, the exceptionally skilled pilots could shape the battle in the skies. And one of the first, famous air aces was Manfred von Richthofen, who was famously known as the Red Baron. He was a German fighter pilot during World War One. He had painted his aircraft red so as to announce his presence in the air, so as to intimidate his aerial opponents. And so the term Red Baron got attached to him. He is considered ace of aces for his 80 air combat victories. This is a large number of people feel that he is one of the greatest air aces ever. Originally, he was a cavalryman. He joined the air service in 1915, and he was into combat in 1916. And he distinguished himself as a fighter pilot, and during 1917 became the leader of the largest fighter wing of Germany. And this wing was called the Richtofen Circus. Why it was called so? Because of the very bright colors of the aircraft, and perhaps also because the way the unit was transferred from one place to the other, and they normally would travel like a circus and live in tents, use improvised airfields. And by 1918, Richthofen was regarded as the greatest national hero of Germany, and he was respected also by his enemies. Richthofen finally got shot down, killed in April 1918. There was so much of respect for him that the Royal Air Force gave him a formal funeral, provided him with pallbearers, and he remains one of the most widely known fighter pilots of all time, and has been a subject of many books and films. And he finds a high place in my book, though I have not categorized who is the greatest or who's less great, because I think each one of them was great in their own little way.
I'm sure there was, sir, but to get full state honors by an enemy for a it's something, it matters, and those were the days with respect during war, I think. So there was an individual who was an Indian and who was supposed to be an air ace in the First World War, although he wasn't given that entire credit during that time. May I request you to tell us his story, sir?
Yeah, World War One had a high participation of Indian soldiers and airmen. 1.5 million Indians were fighting in different theaters of the battle. Among the handful of Indians who fought in the air was one gifted combat pilot who would go on to become the first Indian air ace, the only air ace who is an Indian. His name was Indra Lal Roy. The incredible air warrior was from Bengal. In 1901, Roy's family moved to London when the First World War broke out. Roy was attending school that time, determined to do his bit. He signed up for the cadet force at the school. He was medically declared unfit, but he sold his bike, got some famous eye specialist to have a look at it, got himself cleared, and finally then he was selected, and he joined the Royal Air Force. And 5 months after turning 18, on 4th April 1970, he was physically inducted. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant, and Roy achieved 10 victories starting 6th of July of 1917. That means a few months after having joined, and in just 13 days, he had 170 hours of total flying experience, and he had already achieved 10 kills. Roy was himself shot down in July itself. Having started on 6th, can you imagine, on 22nd July, he was shot down when his plane was attacked by 4 Fokker aircraft. Roy fought back, however, was hit by gunfire from one of the aircraft, and finally his aircraft burst into flames, and before he had to finally crash land into the German controlled territory. He was just 19 years. Roy was the sole Indian World War One flying ace. He is also designated as the first Indian fighter aircraft pilot. Interestingly, his nephew Subroto Mukherjee served as a fighter pilot in World War II and later became the first Indian Chief of Air Staff of Indian Air Force. So see the lineage, see the see this boy who within 3 months became an air ace with 10 kills. Greatly respected that time even by the Germans. Yes.
In 13 days. That's the underlining statement, sir. That is beyond imagination, I must say, sir. So Eric Hartmann,
Yeah.
a German fighter pilot who had 352 air kills. You've covered him quite, quite well in your book, and you've also covered certain other air races from Germany as well. May I request you to tell us the stories of few of them, sir?
Yeah, somehow I like Eric Hartman one hell of a lot. He's a German fighter ace of Second World War. He was the most successful fighter ace because he had the highest number of aerial kills, 352 of them. He flew only 1400 or so combat missions, faced 825 air combats. That's not much considering the total number of aerial kills, that is 352 of them. Out of these, 350 were against Soviets and 2 were against Americans. And in his flying career, Hartman had crash landed his fighter 16 times, either due to enemy action or due to technical failure. He finished his training and joined the famous German fighter wing called JG-52. His fighting career started in mid-1942 on the Eastern Front. In little over a year, he had destroyed 150 aircraft in the first year. By mid-March 1944, that means another 6 months, he had destroyed, crossed the 200 mark. In next 5 months, that is by August 1944, he had crossed 300 mark and was the first to be awarded the coveted Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, which was the highest military award in Germany at that time. Hartman achieved his 352nd, that is his last aerial victory, on the midday on 8th May 1945, just few hours before Germany's surrender. The entire squadron surrendered to the United States Army and was later turned over. Hartman, was turned over to the Soviet side because Soviets insisted that the guy who has shot maximum Soviet aircraft must be handed over to us. And Soviets initially asked him to give his expertise to help them form up their own, aircraft, design the aircraft and tactics. But he refused, and therefore he was tried for war crimes, and he was charged and convicted, and he was initially sentenced for 20 years of imprisonment, later increased to 25 years, and he spent 10 years in various Soviet prison camps and gulags until he was finally released in 1955 after great amount of effort by the West German Chancellor and his parents, who kept asking the United Nations and others to help them get him out. In 1956, Hartman finally was released. He returned back and he joined the West German Air Force, and he continued to fly in the military. And Erich Hartmann finally died at an age of 71 through some natural reasons. I also want to talk of a few other air races, as you just wanted me to. I need to speak of Gerhard Bergkorn, who was the second most successful fighter ace and also a squadron mate of Hartmann. He had 302 victories. Wow. Other than Hartmann, he was the only one who crossed the 300 victory mark. And in 1944, with 274 victories, he was the leading ace. Hartmann was still at around 250 stage. But then Bergkorn was hit in combat and was seriously injured and hospitalized, and was out of action for 4-5 months. And it is in this period that Hartmann overtook him in total numbers of victories. Subsequently, he became fit. He came back. He was not as strong as he was earlier, but he got going, and he thereafter achieved 302 victories. But I must also mention that despite having such large number of victories, he was not awarded the highest German award because he was a little lukewarm to Nazi philosophy. So otherwise, and many people who had, had lesser victories were actually given that highest award, which earlier, as I said, Hartman had also got. Three other aces that I want to speak at this stage. One is the Vietnamese fighter ace. His name was Nguyen Van Kock. Nguyen Van Kock, the highest scoring pilot in Vietnam War. Kock was shot down in the beginning of his combat experience. Luckily, he bailed out and he survived. And one never knew that he would one day become the greatest air ace in the war. He scored 8 kills, and all kills were in MiG-21. All kills were using the R-3S Atoll missile or the Ka-13 missiles, which we used to call in India. He is known as the tiger on the prowl over Vietnamese jungles. So, a great illustrious carrier. And the person he was fighting with from the American side was a triple ace, American fighter pilot Robin Olds. He was ace of 2 wars. He had been an ace in World War II. He was now an ace in Vietnam War. He was the main competitor. Olds had 259 total combat missions, including 107 in World War II and 152 in Southeast Asia, and out of which 105 were in North Vietnam. He had 16 confirmed kills, 12 in World War II and 4 in Vietnam. And he achieved all these kills flying the famous F-4 Phantom. He was generally known to be an anti-establishment person. He was a pro-combat young people and very popular among the youngsters, which in Indian language we'll call him a panga taker. He was taking panga with everybody. He used to support a handlebar mustache, which he used to call it as his way of showing 2 fingers to his bosses. So, however, when he returned to the US after the war, he was given, he was called by his air chief and he was given 1 hour to remove the mustache, which he did most obediently. Interestingly, Olds was married to Hollywood actress and pin-up girl Ela Raines in Beverly Hills in 1947. So most of their 29 years married life marked frequent extended separations and difficult homecomings and some turbulence because of the clash of lifestyles, particularly her refusal to ever come and live in government accommodation at the military bases. Robin Olds and Ela Raines subsequently separated and they got divorced. So I thought I must tell you about Robin Olds. And the last person I want to mention at this stage is undoubtedly Richard Bong. He was the most decorated American fighter pilot and top air ace. He scored 40 victories in World War II, highest by an American, all with Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighter against the Japanese in that Papua New Guinea area, which is now Indonesia, Philippines area. He put picture sticker of his girlfriend and to be later his wife, Marjorie Vandenhall Mars, a sticker on his P-38. He returned home as a national hero and was assigned flight testing duties. He died in California while testing a Lockheed P-80 jet fighter on 6 August, the same day as Hiroshima bombing. And you see his popularity. Next morning, all the newspapers, the front page was full of Hiroshima bombing, and the only thing else that page was full of was the death of Richard Bong. That was the kind of popularity that he had, and his wife, who had been married to him only for a few days, a few months, in fact, actually carried forward his legacy. Yes.
That's some stories, especially, 40 kills for an American who used to have rotationary duties. Well, interesting, sir. So, you mentioned the Vietnam War, and of course the Korean War also in passing. One of the differentials between the Second World War and the Korean War was the jet engine. The advent of jet engine actually increased the flight speeds, increased the capabilities of the aircraft, and made the air battle a little more difficult, dangerous, so on and so forth. You know, who was the first jet ace of of the world, sir?
Yeah, Adi, first I must tell you which was the first jet aircraft of the world, operational jet aircraft, which actually took part in combat, and that was the Messerschmitt's Me-262 was the world's first operational jet-powered fighter aircraft. Me-260, two pilots claimed a total of 542 aircraft shot during last days of the World War II. On 26 July 1944, Lieutenant Alfred Schreber, flying a 262, reportedly damaged an RAF Mosquito reconnaissance aircraft, which supposedly crashed later, and is generally considered the first pilot to have shot a fighter jet with a fighter jet. The real air combat between jet fighters began in Korea, as you very rightly pointed out, and it was between MiG-15s and F-86 Sabres. They were the contemporary aircraft, the Soviet and the American side. And Major James Jabra of USAF was the first American air ace of jet age. That means first person to shoot 5 aircraft flying a jet. And he had finally 15 kills flying F-86 Sabre. Though later USAF Captain Joseph Christopher McNall had 16 kills flying the F-86, but the first person to become an ace, as I said, was Major James Jabra. There was a Russian Major Nikolai Sutagin, who got 22 kills flying the MiG-15. And there was another Chinese air ace, Zhao Baitong, was credited with 9 victories flying the MiG-15 in the Korean War. So you can get an idea of how the MiG-15 and F-86 dominated the Korean War, and they're the ones who got, to become the main air aces. Yes.
Interesting. And, with the kind of speeds and the stuff that happened over there in Korea, if somebody actually gets to know the air battles, they were one of the first, and they were a revolution. Wouldn't you agree, sir, in terms of the air combat of today?
Yes. We all remember when I was a young pilot officer in the Air Force, we used to hear about MiG Alley. In fact, when I was in Adampur Air Base, one of the blocks for living in bachelors was called MiG Alley. So, between Korea and during that war, there was an understanding between the Americans and the Chinese and the Russians that they will, while they're fighting the war in Korea, they will not cross over into a specially designated area, which was called the MiG Alley. And I must tell you that from the air races, you can make out that the Chinese and the Russians were the actual ones who were doing the fighting in Korea. So there are very interesting stories. In fact, somebody will have to pick up this book to be able to, enjoy reading. So what exactly happened and what kind of combat these guys did and what kind of service they did to the local population, while the Americans were living in Korea, how they looked after the local population. Yes.
Interesting, sir. So my next question, I'll take you back to Germany. Gunther Rall, a German fighter pilot, had an Indian connection. Later on, of course, after the Second World War. Can I request you to tell us his story?
Yeah, Gunther Rall is very high in my list of air aces. He's the third highest scoring air ace of all time with 275 air victories. He joined the World War II in the very beginning of the war. That means he was already a pilot when the war, started. And right in November 1941, he had already had his first kill. But he himself was shot down in November 1941 and got wounded, invalided out from flying carrier. At this time, Rall had claimed 36 victories. So he went out of circulation and came back after 8-10 months of hospitalization, and then he rejoined the service. And thereafter he became a actual killing machine. You won't believe it. Having in August 1942, 36 kills. In October, he had 100 kills. You can imagine the kind of rate of firing machine he was. His next 100 came in the next 1 year. And by end of 1943, that is in a period of around 2 years, Rall had already achieved 250 kills. That's one hell of a scoring rate. His final score was 275 victories in just 621 missions. If you were to take per mission record, a number of kills, he will perhaps stand as the best. All his victories were flying the Bf 109. That is also called the Me 109. He was shot down 5 times, wounded on 3 occasions. And after the war, Rall again joined the the German Air Force, which came into being in 1956, where he served till 1975. After his retirement, Rall became a consultant. And in May 1973, as a part of the West German delegation, he was sent to India by designer Kurt Tang. You all will recall Kurt Tang was the designer of HF-24. He supported HAL in creating HF-24, the Marut. And he was keen that this Gunther Rall should come to India, have a look. And in my book, there is a picture of Gunther Rall sitting in HF-24 and being explained the aircraft cockpit by some of the Indian test pilots. He was reportedly quite impressed with the machine, even as he was saddened by the fact that it never achieved its original supersonic dream, because it could never get an engine which we in India, all of us know about. Yes.
As a matter of fact, sir, you've been talking to us about the speed at which these air aces actually got their kills together. I'd like to ask you, so was there someone who actually got to become an ace in one day?
Yeah, there is a ace of a single day. They're not one. There are many air aces who achieved more than 5 kills in a day. So, there are 5 German pilots who were triple aces in a day. Being ace in one day, there will maybe about 60, 70 of them who had more than 5 kills in a day. But there are 5 German pilots who had more than 15 kills in a day. Now, you can imagine. And among them is one guy called Hans Josef Marcel, who had the highest number of air victories in a day at 17. Now, he started his war by getting shot up over English Channel. He bailed out. Then a German seaplane went and picked him up from the English Channel. Early in the war, he crashed his aircraft 4 or 5 times. He was about to be thrown out of the German Air Force. But finally, he was sent to North Africa. When he flew into North Africa, there also he crash landed, and then somebody had to come and pick him up. So his initial, kill rates or air success was very, very low. And even in North Africa, he crashed 3, 4 more times. So he, started introspecting. He realized there was something wrong in him. He created a unique self-training program. And later, he became an ace. As I said, he achieved 17 kills in a day. He achieved 158 finally, his final score of victories. And he became so famous that he was called the Star of Africa. In Africa, there were 2 German people who were very, very famous. One was, of course, Field Marshal Rommel, who was sweeping North Africa left, right, and center. And then there was this boy, Hans Josem, who was the Star of Africa. In fact, there's a book on him which is called The Star of Africa. He had a bohemian lifestyle, but typical of the kind of pilot lifestyle that used to be there in that period. But he was he had a penchant for American jazz music. He loved women. He was an overt playboy lifestyle. He was a charming person, busy nightlife. He would come back from his night activities early in the morning and be ready to fly. He was And when he went for the award ceremony where Hitler was to present his award himself to a couple of these pilots, everybody knew he plays piano. So Hitler said, "Okay, play some music on my piano," and he played jazz. And Hitler used to hate anything that was American, and he was very upset. But he liked the guts of this man, and Hitler was very fond of him because of this man's guts. He was a very popular, squadron commander, and the good thing about him was he flew mercy missions. When he shot down an opponent, he would feel sad that, oh my God, I've shot him down. This guy is still alive. He would go land next to him in the desert, pick up that guy, make him, go closer to his own troops and leave him. And thereafter, and if he kills somebody, he would write a letter to the family regretting to, whatever he had done. And I must tell you, in that famous victory of 17 aircraft in a single day, 8 of them were shot in just 10 minutes. And the Italians were so impressed because there were a lot of Italian soldiers in North Africa in the World War II. They presented him a card on which was painted Otto. Otto means 8. O-T-T-O is the, Otto, we all in English also, we have a word for 8. And the other beauty of this man was all 158 victories of his were against British, except a few that he later on had, which were not against British. Out of 158, I would say only 7 were not against British, which is the highest by anybody. And of course, he also got all his victories on BF-109. And no other pilot has claimed as many Western aircraft as he did. And on 30th September 1942, still early in the war, he had an engine failure, tried to bail out. He hit the vertical stabilizer, and then he subsequently died. But I really like this flamboyant kind of a German pilot that he was. Yes.
A typical fighter pilot of the era, as the definition came from the Second World War itself, sir. But one thing really, I mean, I didn't personally know about the fact that he actually used to rescue his kills, which is something, I mean, one must say that the rules of war used to be written and played by gentlemen those times, especially the air battles. I mean, the ground, of course, a lot of nonsense happened, but the airmen had a certain camaraderie amongst themselves, even of opposing forces, sir. So there are 2 very famous air aces who achieved their kills without having limbs. Now, when I read about this, it kind of blew my head. I'd like you to take us through their, amazing story.
Yeah, both these air aces, I must tell you, are very, very popular in their own countries. One was a British pilot, Douglas Bader, and the second was Hans Ulrich Rudel, who's a German. Both are remembered even today. Both have many books written about them. I'm going to talk a little bit of both of them. Now, Bader first, because Bader was the elder of the 2. Bader was commissioned in the Royal Air Force in 1930. That is 9 years before the war was to begin. But in December 1931 itself, while flying aerobatics, he crashed his aircraft. He barely survived, but lost both his legs in 1931. Still 8 years away was the war. And he had to have 2 artificial legs, but he decided to continue. He loved flying. He decided to continue flying. He took further training. He passed his checks. And he then requested that he be taken back into the Royal Air Force. But, that time there were no regulations that allowed somebody without legs or with artificial legs. So he was retired after that. But then the war clouds came up, and after the outbreak of World War II in 1939, there were need of pilots, and he was accepted back. And now, he started the war with 2 artificial legs, and he was, I must tell you, credited with 22 aerial victories. And in August 1941, that means just 1.5 years after the beginning of the war, or nearly 2 years, Bader had to bail out. He got shot. And during the bailout, his 2 legs flew off. One got left in the cockpit. in the crashed aircraft, and the second one flew out. The German general who was then the head of the fighter fleet, he was the guy who received Bader on the ground. His name was Adolf Galland. Adolf Galland was a very respected, he was a head of the fighter fleet of the Germans. And he really loved Bader because Bader was already carrying a name. And he immediately notified, that Adolf Galland immediately notified the British and offered them a safe passage to drop off replacement legs for Bader. Now, Germans, Hermann Göring himself gave the green light for such an operation, and this the British responded a few days later with the name of the operation was Operation Leg, was the name of the operation. And RAF bomber dropped a new prosthetic legs by parachute over a Luftwaffe base in occupied France. He was a prisoner of war. Bader was a prisoner of war till April 1945, and that means 4 years in prison. And he made many attempts to escape. In fact, the Germans were so angry that they said that they will take away his legs if he made another attempt. Meanwhile, Bader also requested, he became very good friends with Adolf Galland and requested him to fly the Bf-109, but they said, no way we'll let you do that, because if you do it, you will fly off back to England. So Bader attributed his success to the belief in 3 basic rules, and these were the rules shared by many aces of that time, including Erich Hartmann. He says, if you had the height, he who had the height, he controlled the, if you had the height, you controlled the battle. If you came out of the sun, the enemy could not see you. And if you held your fire until you were very close, you will seldom miss it. These 3 traits of coming from maintaining height, saving your height, coming out of the sun, and coming very close to fire is the traits that most of the others had. Bader was given the honor of leading the victory flight past of 300 aircraft, despite being in a prison for 4 years in June 1945 over London. So you can imagine the kind of respect he had. Bader immediately after that retired from RAF, began running a famous charity, and with 2 artificial legs, he was an ardent golfer. The second person that I need to talk about is Hans Ulrich Rudel, later famously called the Eagle of the Eastern Front. Now, Rudel's first flight was at age 8, when he jumped from the roof of his house with an umbrella. Broke his legs, but the injuries was not too bad. And subsequently, nobody knew that one day he'll become a pilot who would fly 2,530 combat missions, the highest flown by anybody in World War II. Majority of his flights were in the Junker Ju-87, also called the Stuka bomber. Although 430 were also flown on Fokker FW-190. But Rudel was credited with the destruction of 500. He was a ground attack pilot. Destruction of 519 tanks, 1 battleship, 1 cruiser, 70 landing crafts, 150 artillery pieces, and more than 100 vehicles of all types. But to be qualified in an air race, you had to shoot people in there, and Rudel had 11 aerial victories, earning him the state of the flying ace. He used to attack in a steep dive. Even at the risk to his own life, he has rescued 6 stranded German aircrew from enemy-held lines. So you see the difference. When he used to find out that one of his squadron mates has got left behind and he had crashed, he used to fly into the enemy territory, land where this guy is, and picks him up. He had 6 such cases. And in some of the cases, he had risked his life very closely. The Soviet dictator Stalin had announced 100,000 rubles reward for the capture of Eagle of East Front, dead or alive. Rudel was wounded 5 times but kept flying regardless. He was shot down more than 30 times by anti-aircraft guns but never shot down by an enemy pilot. Even refused Hitler's request to lie low for a while because he was, going whole hog. And then finally, in February 1945, he was hit. He lost one leg, which had to be amputated, but he continued to fly even after that. And in end April, when it was imminent that the surrender will have to take place very shortly, he offered to Hitler that I will land my Stuka on a Berlin street and evacuate you. But Hitler refused. Rudel was the most decorated German serviceman of World War II, as the sole recipient of the highest award, which was given only to one person, that happened to be him, because Hitler had decided that that award was special to be given after the victory of the war, but the war didn't finish the way Hitler wanted it. Rudel surrendered to US forces on 8th May 1945, immigrated to Argentina in 1948, and he was a staunch Nazi. He founded a relief organization to get the Nazis out from various prisons, but he also became very close to the Argentinian and the Chilean dictators. He became military advisor to Juan Perón in Argentina, and of Pinochet in Chile, and of Alfredo in Paraguay. And Rudel died after a second stroke heart attack in 1982. So these two people not were injured, but were the most popular and most respected air aces of Germany and Britain. Yes.
So would you know he got his air kills in a Focke-Wulf, or he actually shot down an aircraft from a Stuka?
No, not like that. He got his 11 air kills against mostly the Russian aircraft. I have documented the full list of aeroplanes that he shot, all 11 of them, and which particular makes German, Russian, Soviet aircraft they were. Yes.
Interesting, sir. I mean, Stuka dive bombers was one of the most, I think, famous aircraft of the Second World War. Their sounds are even, the diving sounds are even famous, even today. When you hear a video with that thing, it's a Stuka dive bomber. It's such an iconic aircraft.
Yes.
So we've spoken a lot about the pilots, sir. I'd like to ask you, they've been, as we were talking, the Stuka, which was a dive bomber, they were, Messerschmitt Bf-109, the Focke-Wulf 190, these were the German aircraft, and you had the British Supermarine Spitfire, the Hurricane. The Americans came up with the, P-51. These are some of the iconic aircraft. Which one had the highest air kills, sir?
Yeah, before I talk about the aircraft, I also want to talk about one of the women air aces, because we are still at the pilots stage, because there were few. Actually, there were only 2 women air aces who shot more than 5 aircraft. Both were Russian. Why? Because there was no Western system of having dedicated women squadrons. Now, in Russia, there was a famous lady. She was a navigator called Marina Roskova, who managed to convince the hierarchy, especially Stalin, to say that we must form, Russia must have all women squadrons, and the thought of it will, make the Germans underconfident. And they had 3 dedicated, one woman fighter squadron, one bomber squadron, and one night bomber squadron. And these 3 were formed. Now, there was this girl, Lydia Litwik. She was a Russian Jew, and her father had disappeared during Stalin's purge. She did her first solo flight at the age of 15. She had 6 confirmed kills, though she claimed more, but the historians have granted her 6 kills in her 66 combat sortie. And she had reportedly shot down one Bf-109 flown by the Knight's Cross holder, who had 17 kills. He was a German ace. So she had shot one of those guys. She also had fallen in love with her own flight commander, Captain Alexei Solomontin, who got killed in front of her. And thereafter, her mission was from here on was to take revenge. She fought angrily and desperately, and she was also the first to shoot down a hydrogen-filled observation balloon. In Russia, Lydia and the Soviet sharpshooter Rosa Shananin were famously called the beautiful and lethal. Now, Lydia flaunted her femininity. She dyed her hair blonde, wore colorful scarves, often made of parachute material, painted a white lily on her aircraft, and therefore she was also called the White Lily of Leningrad. There is a book called White Lily of Leningrad. She expected her technicians to put flower bouquets in her cockpit when she arrived for the sortie. So she was herself shot down and killed later at the age of 21. You know, when I mentioned she done only 66 combat missions, and she died at the age of 21. But she did not get the adequate recognition that time. In 1990, President Gorbachev posthumously awarded her the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. I thought it is very important to say that, yes, most of the air aces were men, but they were, women air aces who did a tremendous job. And I thought I will just mention about them. Which is the aircraft, you asked me, with the highest, air victories? There are 4 aircraft that especially excelled in World War II and scored high kills. One, of course, was the German Messerschmitt ME or later Bf-109. Then the famous British Supermarine Spitfire, which we also inherited in Indian Air Force. There was this American Lockheed P-38 Lightning, the same aircraft which was flown by Ira Bong, and the Japanese Mitsubishi Zero. Clearly, the Bf-109 was the most successful aircraft. Why? I will tell you. It was introduced in 1937. It finally retired in the day of the surrender. That is on 9th May 1945. 33,984 were built. 33,000 in a period of just 8-9 years. And more aerial kills were made by Bf-109 than any other aircraft ever. There were 105 Bf-109 pilots who were credited with over 100 kills each. There were 13 Bf-109 pilots who scored more than 200 kills. And of course, the 2 pilots of whom we have already spoken, who scored more than 300 kills, were all Bf-109 pilots. So I think there is no doubt that Bf-109 was the most successful aircraft of the World War II. Yes.
Wonderful, sir. I mean, an aircraft that was designed in 1937 went through the war. As a matter of fact, they wanted to replace it with the Focke-Wulf, but never happened. I mean, it held its place. Absolutely, sir. Sir, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, about India. We've fought air wars as well. We fought, there are stories of Indian pilots racking up kills as well. Can I request you to kind of tell us more about these great pilots and what aircraft they were flying and what did they do?
Yeah, Adi, Indian pilots did very well. We all know that during the World War II, there was Jumbo Majumdar who fought both in the Burma campaign and also in the West. There were other pilots who are famous and flew in the Second World War, but none of them became an air ace because the air ace required 105 kills. So technically, we have only had one air ace. But in 65 and 71 wars, the Indian Air Force did extremely well, and there were many pilots who became very famous and are famous even today. In 1965, the Nat aircraft came to be called the Sabre Slayer. The famous Keeler brothers won Veer Chakra, both shooting down a sabre, flying a Nat. In 1971 war, of course, IF had its first Paramveer Chakra when Nirmaljit Singh Sekho single-handedly engaged 6 sabres and shot down 2. Wing Commander Cecil Parker won a Mahavir Chakra. He had shot down 1 sabre and heavily damaged another. There was a squad leader, Devaya, who was a Mahavir Chakra, who shot down a F-104 star fighter, which was much more superior while he was flying a Mystere. Wing Commander Neb, he shot down a Sabre each in both 1965 and 71 wars. So he's a double VRC or VRC bar as we call it. Vrinder Singh Pathania shot down a Sabre. Ganapathy, Don Lazarus, and Roy Andrew Massey, all three of them are very famous because before the war started in 71 in the Eastern Front, all three of them shot an aircraft in the famous encounter over Boira, also called the, on 22nd November in 1971. There were others like Sukrut Raj, he also shot a Sabre. Bharat Bhushan Soni shot a F-104 flying a MiG-21. Harish Masan shot a Sabre flying a Hunter aircraft. And more recently, we had Wing Commander Abhinandan Vartaman, who shot down a F-16 flying a MiG-21. There are many more IF pilots who shot down aircraft. In this short interview, one can only recall, I have just called out a few names, but I'm sure there are so many more, whose names need to be, called out. Yes.
Interesting. Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, in today's air battle, with the speeds and stuff like that, and this is what brings me to my next and last question to you, sir. Do you think, with your experience of today's Air Force and the operational scenarios and the kind of air battles that we project for ourselves, will we ever see another air race?
Adi, times have really changed. With long-range aircraft radars and missiles, chances of close combat has reduced, and so the chances of kills have also reduced. More kills will in future come and beyond visual range combat, with more and more systems becoming unmanned. Would it also this is also reduce the chances of having air aces. The countries with major air forces are already having nuclear weapons. A full-fledged war is much less likely, at least between the major air forces. Afghanistan, Iraq, we saw it was one-sided, wars with asymmetry, high asymmetry that was there. And when I asked one of the living air aces, there is Israeli Brigadier General Goera Hawkeye Epstein, who is the highest ranking air ace of supersonic age. He has shot down in supersonic age 17 aircraft, 16 of which were supersonic aircraft themselves. The targets were supersonic aircraft, and one was, of course, a helicopter. He still lives in Israel. He is a good friend of mine. We are on WhatsApp exchanging messages. Just yesterday, he's received my book, which I had sent through a long, laborious process to Israel, and he's very excited to see his story in the book. So I asked him, before, when I was writing the book, I said, you're a living ace. Please tell me, what are your opinions about, the air aces or air combat of the future? And this is what he said. He said, the times have changed since I engaged in air combat. The airplanes, the systems, the radar, the missiles today will prevent any close combat or dogfights of any kind that he had engaged in. And modern day engagements in the air will be finished even before the pilot will ever see the adversary. And therefore, there is a little air combat advice I can give to the current and future fighter pilots. And this is what he wrote, and this is written in the book. And I must tell you, my book has been published by the Pentagon Press. They are publishing many military books. It is available on Amazon and Flipkart, among others. Do pick up one for yourself. And whoever is listening to this interview, it can make a great gift, because there are stories, inspiring stories of great, flying machines and flying men who made their own nations very proud, and who left behind a legacy that future generations will always be trying to emulate. Yes.
Oh, absolutely, sir. Trust me, listening to these stories has lit a lot of intriguing questions in the mind that one will have to actually sit down and research on. I mean, hearing stories of a person being buried by the enemy with full military honors, right down to someone who had 352 kills. I mean, that is something which is mind-boggling. And I'm sure these both German pilots had a competition going who would actually become the fastest
Yes,
air race.
yes, yes.
And
350 is a huge number, and as I said, there were 100 pilots who had, 100 kills.
yes,
So, but why Germans had so many more kills than the other, not the other way around? Because they were very handful of the German pilots, and they had so many more adversaries to fight against. And each guy was flying much, much more number of sorties compared to the Western guys. And Americans and some of the countries have put a restriction that when you cross X number of aerial kills, you will now become a national hero and you will not require to be flying anymore. Yes.
yeah, well, these guys got the crosses with diamonds and this and that, and they still used to go into the aircraft and fly. I've seen photographs of them flying with their crosses right under their necks.
Yes.
And whatever said and done, sir, the Germans would have done quite a bit of bad in terms of what the Nazis had to do. But the passion with which these pilots actually flew, as you rightly say, that they were flying and they were targeting multiple enemies. I mean, to actually have a successful air kill a few hours before the war ended just tells you the kind of dedication they had towards the job that they had to do, and whatever it was. Of course, coming down to the Indian pilots in 65, 71 who racked up air kills against Pakistan, Nat, which was not supposed to be, which was not considered by the Pakistanis or the Americans for that matter as a very great aircraft. But the Indians, really showed the world what it can do. And I'm sure with the latest, incident which happened with Wing Commander Abhinandan, that tells you that the story of the grit of the fighter pilot lives on. Sir, thank you so much for doing the amount of research that you've done to write this book. I'm sure it is going to benefit, and I am very sure that it will light up the fire in some youngster and a group of youngsters to get into the Indian Air Force and to fly their dream aircraft. Thanks for that, and thank you so much for taking out the time to kind of take me through this journey from the First World War to the last air battle that we saw with Abhinandan, of course.
Thank you. Always a pleasure being with you, Adi, and keep up the great work, and God bless you always. God bless.
Thank you, sir. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.